My name is Marie, and at 37 years old, I never expected to be a widow. 3 months ago, I lost David, my husband of 13 years, to a sudden aneurysm. Just days after his funeral, I dragged myself to my nephew Jake's second birthday party, where my sister Rebecca dropped a bomb. She announced that Jake was actually David's son, showing everyone a will claiming half of my $350,000 house. What she didn't know was why I could barely hold back my laughter. If you're watching this from somewhere where family drama hits close to home, take a moment to like and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to hear how I handled what came next. David and I met 14 years ago at a charity auction benefiting children with cancer. I was volunteering as a pediatric nurse, helping coordinate care packages for young patients when he outbid everyone else for a painting I had been admiring all night. It was a watercolor of the Boston Children's Hospital at sunset, vibrant oranges and purples bleeding into the skyline. After winning, he walked straight over to me and handed it over. "I noticed you looking at this all night," he said with a smile that made his green eyes crinkle at the corners. "I think it belongs with someone who understands what it represents." That was David, thoughtful, observant, and generous to a fault. I fell hard and fast. We went on our first date the next evening, and it felt like we had known each other our entire lives. He was a pediatric surgeon, brilliant but humble, the kind of man who remembered the names of every nurse on our unit and asked genuine questions about their families. 8 months after we met, he proposed in the hospital garden with the actual building mirroring the painting that brought us together. We bought our modest home in a quiet suburb shortly after our first anniversary. It was a stretch financially at $350,000, but David had just been promoted to chief of pediatric surgery, and I was advancing to head nurse of the pediatric intensive care unit. The house needed work, but it had good bones. 3 bedrooms and a small backyard where I envisioned future children playing. Those children never came, not for lack of trying. For years we charted temperatures, tracked cycles, and hoped with every passing month. Then came the specialists, the tests, the procedures that became our routine. 4 rounds of IVF that drained our savings and our spirits. I still remember the last failed attempt, the quiet drive home from the fertility clinic, David reaching across the console to hold my hand, neither of us speaking because we both knew that was the end of that road. "We can still have a beautiful life," David said that night as we sat on our porch swing. "You and me, that's enough." And he meant it. We slowly rebuilt our dreams. We traveled to medical conferences together. We poured ourselves into our work with sick children. We renovated the house room by room until it was the warm home I had always imagined. David supported my decision when I pursued additional certification in pediatric oncology nursing. Our life was full, if different than what we had first planned. My younger sister Rebecca was always in the periphery of our happiness. 9 years younger than me at 28. She had always been the artistic one of the family. While I was studying nursing and building my career in healthcare, she was pursuing her passion for beauty and style. Our parents constantly worried about her unstable income as a freelance beauty specialist, which translated to them making excuses for her behavior and bailing her out of financial troubles repeatedly. Rebecca and I had a complicated relationship from childhood. She was undeniably beautiful with the kind of effortless charm that drew people to her. But there was always an undercurrent of competition from her side. If I achieved something in my nursing career, she needed to prove her artistic talents were equally valuable. When I started dating David, she suddenly became interested in medical students. When we bought our house, she complained for months about her small apartment, fishing for our parents to help her upgrade. It was exhausting, but David encouraged me to maintain the relationship. "She's your only sister," he would remind me. Family is important, especially in our line of work. 2 years ago, Rebecca started dating Marcus, a construction worker she met while getting her nails done at a salon where she was working. He was handsome in a rugged way, with calloused hands and a pickup truck that our parents disapproved of. Their relationship seemed volatile from the outside, with dramatic breakups and passionate reconciliations. Then came the pregnancy announcement at Thanksgiving dinner the year before David died. It was unexpected, to say the least. Rebecca had never expressed interest in having children. In fact, she had frequently commented on how my desire for children was just societal pressure on women. Yet there she was, announcing her pregnancy with theatrical tears and declarations about the miracle of motherhood. I felt the familiar sting of jealousy mixed with genuine concern. After all our struggles, all our heartbreak, Rebecca had accidentally achieved what we had desperately wanted. But I pushed those feelings down. I was genuinely happy for her, and I was determined to be the best aunt possible to her child. Jake was born a healthy 7 pounds, 6 ounces, but with a congenital heart defect that required immediate surgery. I was at the hospital with flowers and a handmade blanket I had spent months knitting during my off hours. Rebecca seemed overwhelmed by motherhood from the start, especially with Jake's medical needs, often calling me in tears about his feeding schedule or her exhaustion. I stepped in as much as I could, using my pediatric nursing experience to help care for Jake overnight so she could sleep. David was less involved with Jake than I was. In retrospect, I thought it was because of our own fertility struggles, that it might be painful for him to bond with a baby that wasn't ours. He was always professional and kind when Rebecca brought Jake to the hospital for his cardiology appointments, but he maintained a certain distance that I never questioned at the time. Then came that terrible Wednesday morning. David complained of a headache before leaving for the hospital. I suggested he stay home, but he had a critical surgery scheduled for a 3-year-old patient. Just stress, he insisted, kissing me goodbye. I'll call you after the procedure. That call never came. Instead, I got one from our charge nurse. By the time I ran down to the emergency department, he was already gone. Brain aneurysm, they said. Nothing could have been done. He was 34 years old. The next days passed in a blur of arrangements and grief. Rebecca was strangely absent during most of it, sending text messages claiming Jake was having heart complications or she couldn't find reliable childcare. When she did appear at the funeral, she stayed briefly, keeping to herself and leaving before the reception. I was too numb with grief to think much of it at the time. 1 week after we laid David to rest, Jake's second birthday arrived. The last thing I wanted to do was attend a children's birthday party, but family obligations pulled at me. David would want you to go. My mother insisted during one of her daily check-in calls. He always said family comes first, so I found myself driving to the community centre Rebecca had rented. A wrapped gift on the passenger seat and dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. I had barely slept since David died, spending nights staring at his empty side of the bed, reaching for a warmth that was no longer there. I parked behind a line of cars and took several deep breaths before grabbing the gift and heading inside. No one should have to fake happiness so soon after losing their husband, I thought. But I plastered on a smile and walked through the entrance. Rebecca's friend Jessica greeted me at the door, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of me. "Oh, Marie, you made it," she said, her voice oddly strained. She glanced over her shoulder before stepping aside. "Come in." Everyone's gathering in the main room. The community centre was decorated with colourful balloons and streamers. A banner reading "Happy Second Birthday, Jake" stretched across one wall. I noticed a group of people I didn't recognise clustered near the refreshment table, whispering. They fell silent as I passed, their eyes following me. In the main room, more guests stood in small groups, paper cups in hand. I spotted my parents sitting awkwardly at a folding table, looking uncomfortable. My father stood when he saw me, relief washing over his face. "Marie," he said, embracing me. "We weren't sure you would come." "Of course I came," I replied, setting the gift on the designated table. "Where's the birthday boy?" "With Rebecca," my mother said, not quite meeting my eyes. "They should be out soon for the cake." I mingled awkwardly, accepting condolences and deflecting questions about how I was holding up as a widow in the medical field. Everyone seemed on edge, conversations stopping abruptly when I approached. I chalked it up to people not knowing how to act around a newly widowed healthcare worker. After 30 uncomfortable minutes, Rebecca emerged from a side room carrying Jake on her hip. She was wearing a designer dress I had never seen before, her hair professionally styled. Jake looked adorable in a little sailor outfit, his chubby legs kicking with excitement at all the attention, a thin surgical scar barely visible on his chest from his heart repair. Rebecca barely acknowledged me as she placed Jake in his high chair. She seemed energized, almost giddy, moving around the room with an unusual confidence. She tapped a plastic fork against her cup, calling for everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate Jake's special day," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "This past year has been full of surprises and challenges, as many of you know." The guests exchanged glances. My mother suddenly became very interested in her shoes. "I've been keeping a secret," Rebecca continued, placing a manicured hand on Jake's head. "One that I can no longer hide, especially after recent events." A chill ran down my spine. Something was very wrong. Jake is not Marcus's son, she announced, her eyes finding mine across the room. He's David's. The world seemed to stop. I heard gasps around me, felt my father stiffen beside me, but it was all background noise to the rushing in my ears. Marie's husband and I had a brief affair 3 years ago, Rebecca continued, her voice steady and rehearsed. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness for both of us. We never meant to hurt anyone. But these things happen between people who work in stressful medical environments. I stood frozen, unable to process what I was hearing. My sister was claiming she had slept with my husband, that her son, the nephew I had helped care for medically, was actually David's child. It was so absurd that I almost laughed out loud. Rebecca wasn't finished. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. David knew the truth about Jake. Before he died, he updated his will. She held up the paper. He wanted his son to be provided for. This will states that half of the house David and Marie owned should go to Jake as his biological child. Every eye in the room turned to me. I could see the pity, the morbid curiosity, the discomfort. My parents looked stricken, my father half standing as if unsure whether to intervene. And then, to everyone's surprise, including my own, I felt a smile tugging at my lips. Not a happy smile, but the kind that comes when something is so outrageously false that it becomes almost comical. I pressed my lips together, trying to contain the inappropriate laughter bubbling up inside me. "Oh, I see," I said finally, my voice calm and controlled in the way I had learned to be during medical emergencies. I took a sip of water to buy time, to push down the urge to laugh in my sister's face. "May I see this will, Rebecca?" Her confident expression faltered slightly. She clearly hadn't expected this reaction from someone trained to handle crisis situations. Slowly, she walked over and handed me the document. A typed page with what appeared to be David's signature at the bottom. I scanned it quickly, noting inconsistencies immediately. The formal language was all wrong. Nothing like the legal documents I had seen David review for our medical practice consultations. And the signature, while similar to David's, was clearly forged. The way he connected his letters when signing medical charts was completely different. I carefully folded the paper and handed it back to her. "Thank you for sharing this with me. I think I need to go now." "That's it?" Rebecca asked, confusion evident in her voice. "You're not going to say anything else?" "Not right now," I replied calmly, gathering my purse. "This is Jake's day. We can discuss this privately later." I said goodbye to my shell-shocked parents, promising to call them soon. As I walked to my car, I could hear the murmurs behind me, the party atmosphere completely shattered. Once inside my car, safely out of view, I finally let out the laugh that had been threatening to escape. It started small, then grew until tears were streaming down my face. Not tears of joy, but a strange mix of grief, anger, and incredulous disbelief at my sister's audacity. Because there was something Rebecca didn't know. Something David and I had never shared with anyone. Something that made her elaborate lie not just hurtful, but medically impossible. The truth about David and Rebecca began 3 years ago, long before Jake was even conceived. We had invited my sister over for dinner to celebrate her new position at an upscale salon in downtown Boston, her most stable employment to date. David had prepared his signature pasta dish, and we had opened a good bottle of wine to celebrate. It was a pleasant evening until I excused myself to take an urgent call from the hospital about one of my pediatric patients who was experiencing complications. The call took longer than expected, nearly 20 minutes of coordinating with the night shift about medication adjustments and monitoring protocols. When I returned to the dining room, the atmosphere had changed. David looked uncomfortable, and Rebecca was sitting much closer to him than when I had left, her hand resting on his forearm, laughing at something I hadn't heard. I thought nothing of it at the time. Rebecca had always been physically affectionate, and the wine had been flowing freely. But later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, David seemed troubled. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, sitting on the edge of our bed. "And I don't want it to cause problems between you and your sister, but I also don't want to keep secrets from you." He explained that while I was handling the patient emergency, Rebecca had made inappropriate advances toward him. Nothing dramatic, just suggestive comments about how lucky I was to have someone so dedicated, followed by a suggestion that he deserved someone who could truly understand the pressures of his work. When he had firmly declined, she laughed it off as a joke, saying I was too serious if he thought she meant anything by it. I was hurt but not entirely surprised. Rebecca had always tested boundaries, especially when she'd been drinking. We decided to let it go as an isolated incident, something caused by wine and her usual need for attention. But it wasn't isolated. Over the next few months, Rebecca found ways to touch David whenever I wasn't looking, sent text messages that crossed the line between sisterly and flirtatious, and once showed up at the hospital uninvited, asking him to grab coffee. Each time, David gently but firmly maintained boundaries and told me immediately afterward. After the hospital incident, we confronted my parents about Rebecca's behavior. It didn't go well. They suggested David was misinterpreting friendly gestures and that Rebecca just admired him as a brother-in-law. My mother even suggested, with good intentions but terrible judgment, that perhaps David was feeling flattered by the attention and reading too much into innocent interactions. That night, David and I made a decision. We would create distance from Rebecca without causing a family rift. We declined invitations that included her, made sure we were never alone with her, and David blocked her number on his phone after she sent a particularly inappropriate late-night message about how lonely she felt. Then came the medical issue that changed everything. David had been experiencing pain for weeks before finally seeing a specialist. The diagnosis was a varicocele, an enlargement of veins requiring surgical intervention. The procedure went well, but there was a complication during recovery. The surgeon recommended a vasectomy during the same operation due to the extensive nature of the varicocele and high risk of recurrence. It was a difficult decision, especially given our past fertility struggles. But we agreed it was the right choice for David's long-term health. The vasectomy was performed 3 years before Jake was conceived. We kept this medical information completely private. Even our parents didn't know. After years of invasive questions about our childless status from family and colleagues, we had learned to protect our privacy around reproductive issues. The only people who knew were David, myself, and his medical team. After the surgery, as David was recovering, he made a prediction that seemed overly cautious at the time. "Rebecca isn't finished," he said, sitting in our backyard with an ice pack discreetly positioned. "I have a feeling she might try something more dramatic eventually." I dismissed his concerns, but David was serious. The next week, he scheduled an appointment with our family attorney, Sarah Chen. I went with him, listening as David detailed Rebecca's behavior and his recent medical procedure. Sarah recommended documenting everything: the unwanted advances, the medical records confirming the vasectomy, even text messages and emails from Rebecca. "You never know what might become relevant later," Sarah advised. "Better to have documentation and never need it than wish you had it when something happens." We followed her advice, creating a comprehensive file of everything related to the situation. David also updated his will properly through official channels, making sure everything would come to me in the event of his death. Sarah kept copies of all documents, and we placed the originals in our fireproof home safe and a backup copy in my hospital locker. "Just in case," David had said when we locked the safe. Though I plan to be around to deal with any of Rebecca's drama for at least another 50 years. The morning after Jake's birthday party, I went straight to our home office. I sat in David's chair, the one where he used to review patient charts, and opened the safe we had filled with what he called our emergency preparation kit. Inside was exactly what I needed: David's legitimate will, notarized and properly executed. Leaving everything to me: medical records detailing his vasectomy 3 years before Jake's conception, making it biologically impossible for him to be the father; a detailed log David had kept documenting every inappropriate interaction with Rebecca, including dates, times, and exact quotes; printed copies of text messages she had sent him, a letter from our attorney confirming that she had witnessed David's legitimate will and was available to verify its authenticity. And at the bottom of the safe, a sealed envelope with my name written in David's familiar handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it and began to read. "My dearest Marie, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and you've needed to access these documents. I hope it's many years from now when we're old and grey and Rebecca's antics are nothing but a distant memory we laugh about over coffee. But if not, if the worst has happened and she's tried to hurt you in my absence, please know that I tried to prepare for every possibility. Use these documents to protect yourself. I know how much you value family, how deeply you care for those you love, but you deserve to be protected from those who would take advantage of that beautiful, caring heart of yours. I love you beyond words, beyond time. Whatever happens, know that your strength and compassion made every day of my life better. David." Tears streamed down my face as I read his words. feeling his love and protection reaching out to me even after death. My thoughtful, methodical husband had anticipated this scenario. Not the specific details, perhaps, but the possibility that Rebecca might try to exploit his death for her own gain. I carefully returned everything to the safe except what I needed. Copies of the medical records, the legitimate will, and selected entries from David's log. Then I called Sarah Chen and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. Sarah Chen's law office was in a modern building in downtown Boston, the kind of place that balanced professional efficiency with personal warmth. I had only been there a few times with David for our estate planning, but the receptionist recognized me immediately, her expression softening with sympathy. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, standing to greet me. "Ms. Chen is expecting you. Please accept my condolences for your loss." Sarah was in her early 40s with kind eyes behind stylish glasses and an aura of quiet competence. She had been David's colleague before becoming our attorney, and they had maintained a friendship built on mutual respect for their medical and legal expertise. She stood when I entered, coming around her desk to embrace me briefly. "Marie," she said, gesturing for me to sit. I was heartbroken to hear about David. He was truly one of the good ones. He was, I agreed, my voice catching slightly. And it seems he was also right about preparing for the worst with my sister. I explained what had happened at the birthday party, showing her the forged will Rebecca had presented. Sarah examined it carefully, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "This is a poorly executed forgery," she said finally. "The legal language is completely incorrect, and the signature, while superficially similar, would never withstand professional analysis. But the fact that she created this document at all is deeply troubling." I showed her the documents from our safe, the medical records confirming David's vasectomy, the legitimate will, and David's detailed log documenting Rebecca's behavior over the years. "David was thorough as always," Sarah said, reviewing the materials. "These medical records alone completely disprove her claim about Jake's paternity. The vasectomy was performed 3 years before the child was conceived. It's medically impossible for David to be the father." "What should I do?" I asked. "I don't want to humiliate her publicly, but I can't let her steal half of our home based on a lie." Sarah leaned back in her chair, considering. "First, we need more information. I recommend hiring a private investigator to examine Rebecca's current situation. There's likely a specific motivation beyond simple greed here. People rarely attempt fraud of this magnitude without serious financial pressure." She recommended Lisa Rodriguez, a former police detective who now worked as a private investigator, often on cases for the firm. I agreed, and Sarah made the call immediately, explaining the situation in broad terms. Lisa arrived an hour later, a sharp-eyed woman with greying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She took detailed notes as I explained the situation, asking pointed questions about Rebecca's employment history, relationships, and financial status. I realized how little I actually knew about my sister's current circumstances. We had grown apart since Jake's birth, with my attempts to help as a medical professional often dismissed or taken for granted. "I'll need a few days," Lisa said when I had finished. "My initial focus will be on her financial situation and relationship with the child's actual father. Can you tell me anything else about him?" I shared what little I knew about Marcus, the construction worker Rebecca had been dating when she became pregnant. I had only met him a handful of times, and he had seemed disinterested in family gatherings. Last I heard, they were still together. "But she rarely mentions him anymore," I said. "He wasn't at the party yesterday, which I thought was strange for the father of the birthday boy." Lisa nodded, making another note. "That's a good starting point. I'll be in touch soon." 3 days later, Lisa called requesting a meeting at Sarah's office. When I arrived, both women were reviewing documents spread across the conference table. "Marie," Lisa began once we were seated, "I've uncovered some troubling information about your sister's situation." According to her investigation, Rebecca was in severe financial distress. She had accumulated over $70,000 in debt spread across credit cards, personal loans and medical bills for Jake, who had required multiple cardiac procedures since birth. Her credit score was disastrous, and she had been rejected for consolidation loans 3 times in the past month. "She's also facing eviction," Lisa continued, sliding a document across the table. "This is a copy of the notice her landlord filed last week. She has until the end of the month to pay 3 months of back rent or vacate the apartment. As for Marcus, he had apparently abandoned Rebecca and Jake shortly after the birth, moving to Denver with a new girlfriend. He was paying minimal child support, Barely $150 a month, and even that sporadically. I also found these, Lisa said, producing printouts of text messages. She's been discussing her plans to claim part of your house for weeks. These are messages between her and a friend named Jessica. I recognized the name as the woman who had greeted me at the party. The messages were damning. David's death is terrible, but maybe it's finally my chance to get what I deserve. That house is worth at least $350K now. If I play this right, I'll have enough money to save Jake and me. The will is almost finished. My friend Alex is good with design software and found a sample of David's signature from some medical conference photos online. It looks completely authentic. Marie has always been the responsible one. Time for me to get my share. She got 13 years with an amazing guy. The least she can do is share the financial benefits now that he's gone. I felt physically sick reading the calculated coldness of my sister's words. This wasn't just desperation. It was premeditated fraud designed to exploit my grief. There's more, Lisa said gently. I ran a background check on Marcus Sullivan, the actual father. He has a history of domestic violence charges from a previous relationship, and currently has a warrant out for unpaid child support for another child in Vermont. He's not someone you'd want around your nephew. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything. My sister wasn't just desperate. She was willing to destroy David's reputation and our marriage to solve her financial problems. And her choice in partners had put Jake in a potentially dangerous situation. What do I do with all this? I asked, looking between Sarah and Lisa. I can't just expose all of this publicly. Jake is innocent in all of this. He's still my nephew. Sarah removed her glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully. You have several options, Marie. We could file criminal charges against Rebecca for attempted fraud and forgery that would likely result in serious legal consequences for her, possibly even jail time given the amount of money involved. Or, she continued, seeing my distress, we could handle this privately, confront her with the evidence, require her to retract her claims, and potentially work out an arrangement that protects both you and Jake. I left the meeting with a heavy heart and a folder full of evidence. That evening, I called Dr. Patricia Williams, the therapist I had been seeing since David's death, and scheduled an emergency session. In her warm, book-lined office, I unloaded the entire situation. I'm so angry I can barely think straight, I admitted. But Jake is just a baby with medical needs. None of this is his fault. And despite everything, Rebecca is still my sister. Dr. Williams listened attentively, asking occasional questions about my relationship with Rebecca throughout our lives. It sounds like this pattern of competition and boundary crossing has existed since childhood, she observed. The current situation is an escalation, not an anomaly. What would you do? I asked desperately. I can't tell you what decision to make, she replied. But I will say that compassion doesn't mean allowing yourself to be victimized. You can be kind while still establishing firm boundaries and consequences. After much reflection, I decided on a course of action. I would confront Rebecca privately with all the evidence, offering her a choice-face potential criminal prosecution for her fraud, or accept a compromise that would provide for Jake while requiring accountability from her. With renewed determination, I called Rebecca the next morning. We need to talk about the will, I said when she answered. Can you come to my house tomorrow afternoon? Just you, no Jake. I knew you'd see reason, she replied, sounding smugly satisfied. I'll be there at 2. I spent the morning preparing for Rebecca's visit, arranging documents in logical order and setting up recording equipment on Sarah's advice. Massachusetts is a 2-party consent state, she had warned me. So you can't record her secretly, but you can ask for her permission at the start of your conversation, framing it as a way to ensure you both have a record of any agreement reached. At precisely 200, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before opening the door. Rebecca stood on the porch looking polished in a new outfit, her confidence evident in her posture. Come in, I said, leading her to the living room where I had set up 2 chairs facing each other. A coffee table between them with a recorder, water glasses, and a folder of documents. I hope you don't mind if we record our conversation. It seems wise given the legal nature of what we're discussing. Rebecca hesitated only briefly before nodding. Sure, whatever makes you comfortable. Though I think this should be pretty straightforward. The will speaks for itself. Then I sat back, studying my sister's face. Before we discuss the will, I'd like to understand exactly what you're claiming happened between you and David. Rebecca launched into a well-rehearsed story about a supposed affair 3 years ago. According to her version, she and David had connected during a period when he and I were experiencing marital problems. We weren't. She claimed they met several times at a hotel downtown, that David had confessed his unhappiness in our marriage, and that Jake was conceived during these encounters. He always intended to tell you, she said, her eyes wide with practiced sincerity. But then Jake was born with the heart condition, and he didn't want to add stress to an already difficult situation. He promised he would provide for his son, though. I listened without interrupting, noting the inconsistencies in her timeline and the details that contradicted what I knew about David's schedule during that period. When she finished, I began asking questions. "Which hotel did you meet at?" I asked. "The Four Seasons," she replied quickly. "And what room? Do you remember?" She faltered slightly. It was on a high floor. "I don't recall the exact number. What days of the week did you usually meet?" "Wednesdays, sometimes Fridays, when he told you he was working late at the hospital." I continued with increasingly specific questions. What did David typically order from room service? What side of the bed did he prefer? Did he shower before or after? Details that only someone who had actually been intimate with David would know. Rebecca grew increasingly flustered, her answers becoming vague or contradictory. "Why does any of this matter?" she finally snapped. "The point is that Jake is David's son, and the will proves David wanted to provide for him." "Actually," I said calmly, opening my folder, "both of those claims are demonstrably false." I placed the medical records on the table between us. 3 years before Jake was conceived, David had a vasectomy following surgery for a varicose seal. It was completely successful, confirmed by follow-up testing. It was physically impossible for him to father a child after that procedure. Rebecca's face drained of color. She picked up the medical records with trembling hands, scanning the clinical language and dates. "These could be falsified," she said weakly. "They're not," I replied, "and David's surgeon is prepared to testify to their authenticity if necessary." But that's just the beginning. Next, I produced the legitimate will, notarized and properly filed with the court. This is David's actual will, prepared by Sarah Chen and witnessed by 2 partners at her firm. As you can see, it leaves everything to me, with no mention of Jake. Rebecca's confidence was visibly crumbling, but she attempted to rally. "He must have changed it after this was drawn up." "The will I have is more recent. The will you have," I said evenly, "is a forgery. A poor one, I might add. Sarah has already identified multiple legal inconsistencies in the language, and the signature is clearly fake. Creating a fraudulent will is a felony in Massachusetts, punishable by up to 5 years in prison." I continued methodically presenting evidence, David's log documenting her inappropriate advances, the text messages between her and Jessica discussing the plan, and finally, the report from Lisa's investigation detailing her financial troubles, eviction notice, and Marcus's abandonment. "We know everything, Rebecca," I said as she sat in stunned silence. "The question now is what happens next." For a long moment she didn't speak. Then, to my surprise, she began to cry. Not the theatrical tears I had seen her use to manipulate our parents, but deep, body-racking sobs. "I didn't know what else to do," she finally said between gasps. "I'm going to be homeless. Jake and I will be out on the street in 2 weeks. Marcus left us with nothing. The medical bills just keep coming," I thought. "If I could just get some money from the house." "So you decided to destroy David's reputation?" I asked, my voice hardening. "To tell everyone he cheated on me, to forge legal documents." "I was desperate," she shouted, her sadness turning to anger. "You have everything. This beautiful house, a respected career, everyone's admiration. What do I have? A baby with a heart condition, $70,000 in debt, and an eviction notice. You try making good decisions in that situation." Her outburst hung in the air between us. The raw honesty of it, stripped of the manipulation and lies, reached something in me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps understanding. "Jake is Marcus's son, isn't he?" I asked more gently. She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes. David never touched me. Not like that. I did try with him years ago. He always shut me down immediately. He was annoyingly loyal to you." "And the will?" "My friend Alex helped me create it. She does graphic design and thought it would be easy to fake a signature. I was going to use it to pressure you into giving me money. I never thought you'd actually investigate it so thoroughly." I turned off the recorder and sat back, considering my next move. Rebecca watched me nervously, clearly expecting the worst. "I could press charges," I said finally. "What you did was illegal, not to mention cruel and calculated. She nodded miserably. I know. But that would hurt Jake, I continued. And despite everything, he's my nephew. I love him. I leaned forward, making sure she was looking directly at me. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell everyone the truth, that you lied about the affair, that Jake is not David's son, and that you forged the will. You will apologize publicly to me and to David's memory. And then what? She asked, her voice small. We'll still be evicted. I'm not finished, I said. In exchange for your full confession and a legal agreement never to attempt anything like this again, I will help you and Jake. Not by giving you half my house, but by setting up a medical trust fund for Jake's ongoing cardiac care and helping you find stable housing and employment. Her eyes widened. Why would you do that after what I did? Not for you, I said honestly. For Jake. And because David would want me to help his nephew, even if that nephew's mother tried to destroy his reputation. There will be conditions, I continued. You will enter therapy and financial counseling. You will maintain steady employment. And you will allow me to be part of Jake's life to ensure he's receiving proper medical care. If you violate any of these conditions, the support stops immediately. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. I don't deserve your help, she finally said. No, I agreed. You don't. But Jake deserves proper medical care and a stable home. And I deserve to have my husband's memory protected. This solution gives us both what we need. After further discussion of the details, Rebecca agreed to my terms. We would meet with Sarah the next day to formalize the agreement, and she would make her public confession at a family dinner the following weekend. As I showed her out, she paused at the door. I really am sorry, Marie. I've been jealous of you my whole life. Everything always seemed to come so easily to you. Nothing about my life has been easy, I replied. You just never bothered to look past the surface. Maybe it's time you started. The family dinner I arranged for Saturday evening was tense from the start. My parents arrived early, my mother bringing her famous pot roast as a peace offering. I don't know what this is about, she said as she set the dish on my counter. But Rebecca has been calling us in tears, saying you're forcing her to come to some sort of family meeting. Just wait until everyone is here, I replied, pouring her a glass of wine. This needs to be addressed once, with everyone present. By 6:30, we were all seated around my dining room table, my parents, Rebecca without Jake, who was with a babysitter, and me. Sarah had advised me to record this conversation as well, and a small recorder sat in the center of the table. Thank you all for coming, I began after explaining the recording. I've asked Rebecca to share some important information with you. Rebecca? My sister looked pale and uncomfortable, her usual confidence nowhere to be seen. She stared down at her plate as she spoke. I lied about Jake being David's son, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. David and I never had an affair. Jake is Marcus's child, and I forged the will I showed at the birthday party. My parents stared at her in shock. But why would you do such a thing? My father demanded. Do you have any idea what that claim did to your sister, to David's reputation? Rebecca explained her desperate financial situation, her voice gaining strength as she detailed the mounting debts, Marcus's abandonment and the eviction notice. As she spoke, I could see my mother's expression shifting from shock to sympathy. Oh, honey, she said when Rebecca finished, why didn't you just come to us for help? You didn't need to make up such terrible lies. Would you have given me $175,000, Rebecca asked bluntly. Because that's what I would have gotten if my plan had worked. Half the value of Marie's house. Of course we couldn't give you that kind of money, my father said. But we could have helped with the rent, at least temporarily. Instead, you chose to try to defraud your own sister while she was grieving her husband. I know it was wrong, Rebecca admitted. Marie has already made that abundantly clear. She has the evidence to press charges against me if she wanted to. My mother turned to me in alarm. You wouldn't do that to your own sister, would you, Marie? I felt a flash of frustration at her immediate defense of Rebecca even now. I could, I said firmly. What she did wasn't just immoral, it was illegal. Forgery and fraud are felonies. But she's family, my mother insisted. And she has Jake to think about. I'm family too, I replied, my voice rising slightly. Your daughter too, the one who just lost her husband and then had to defend his memory against false accusations of infidelity. Where was your concern for me in all this? My father looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. Of course we care about you, Marie. But Rebecca has always needed more help, more guidance. And whose fault is that? I asked. You've been bailing her out of her poor decisions her entire life. Maybe if you'd let her face consequences occasionally, she wouldn't have escalated to criminal behavior. My mother gasped. That's hardly fair, Marie. We've always treated you girls equally. Rebecca surprisingly shook her head. No, Mom, you haven't. Marie is right. You always made excuses for me, always found ways to fix my mistakes. It didn't help me. It just made me think I could do whatever I wanted without consequences. My parents looked stunned at this admission. For perhaps the first time, Rebecca was taking responsibility rather than deflecting blame. So what happens now? My father asked, looking between us. Is Rebecca going to jail? No, I said. I've decided not to press charges under certain conditions. I outlined the agreement Rebecca and I had reached with Sarah's help, the medical trust fund for Jake, the therapy and financial counseling requirements, and the stable employment condition. That's very generous, my father said, looking relieved. Especially after what she did. It's more than generous, Rebecca agreed quietly. It's more than I deserve. Well, my mother said, brightening. This is all working out for the best then. Rebecca has apologized, Marie is helping with Jake, and we can put this ugly business behind us. It's not that simple, Mom, I said firmly. Trust has been broken here. Healing will take time if it happens at all, and there need to be boundaries going forward. What kind of boundaries? She asked, looking worried. For one thing, I need you both to stop enabling Rebecca's behavior. No more bailouts, no more excuses. She needs to learn to stand on her own feet, with appropriate support that doesn't create dependency. My father nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. And I need you to respect that my relationship with Rebecca will be different now. I will be involved in Jake's life because I love him and want the best for him. But Rebecca and I will not be close the way we once were, at least not for a long time. My mother looked distressed. But we're family. We need to stick together, especially now. Being family doesn't mean tolerating abuse, Mom, I said gently. What Rebecca did was abusive. She tried to use my grief to manipulate me, to take advantage of me at my most vulnerable. That has consequences even within a family. The remainder of the dinner was subdued with my parents processing this new reality. When they left, my father hugged me tightly, whispering, I'm proud of you, Marie. David would be too. My mother hugged me as well, but her eyes were sad, already mourning the idealized family dynamic she had always pretended we had. Rebecca was the last to leave. At the door, she hesitated. I really am sorry, she said again. Not just for the will and the lies, but for everything. For the years of competition and jealousy. For not being the sister you deserved. I know, I replied. And I hope the therapy helps you understand why you made these choices. Jake deserves a mother who is emotionally healthy and honest. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? She asked. I considered the question carefully. I don't know, I answered truthfully. But I'm willing to see where this new path takes us. For Jake's sake, and maybe someday for ours too. 1 year after David's death, I stood in our backyard garden watching the spring bulbs push through the soil. The tulips David had planted the previous fall were blooming, a riot of pink and yellow against the newly green grass. I felt a bittersweet ache seeing them, knowing he had put them in the ground, with hopes of seeing them bloom. So much had changed in that year. The medical trust fund for Jake was established and already helping with his ongoing cardiac care. His heart condition, while requiring regular monitoring, was responding well to treatment, and he was growing into a cheerful, energetic toddler. Rebecca had surprised everyone by truly embracing the conditions of our agreement. 6 months of therapy had helped her recognize patterns of behavior stemming from childhood. The constant need to compete with me, the self-sabotage that had characterized many of her decisions. She had found steady employment as a receptionist at a pediatric clinic, a job that provided stability and health insurance. Our relationship remained formal but cordial. I saw Jake regularly, using my medical knowledge to help coordinate his care and taking him for outings to the Children's Museum. Rebecca and I didn't pretend to be close, but we had found a way to coexist peacefully for Jake's sake. My parents had struggled initially with the new boundaries I had established. My mother especially found it difficult to accept that her daughters would not have the close relationship she had always envisioned. But over time, they too had adjusted, learning to support Rebecca without enabling her dependency. As for me, the grief support group I had joined shortly after David's death had become a lifeline. 10 strangers bound together by loss had become friends, understanding each other in ways that even well-meaning family and friends could not. We met weekly, sharing our journeys through grief, celebrating small victories, and supporting each other through the inevitable setbacks. 3 months after the confrontation with Rebecca, I had established the David Thompson Memorial Fund for Pediatric Cardiology, providing support to families struggling with the financial burden of childhood heart conditions. It gave me purpose to see David's legacy continuing in the lives of children and families who might otherwise struggle alone. Old friends had stepped up in ways I could never have anticipated. My former nursing colleagues checked in regularly, inviting me to dinners and events, making sure I wasn't isolated in my grief. My college roommate Jennifer flew in from Seattle monthly just to spend weekends with me, sometimes doing nothing more than watching movies and ordering takeout. And then there was Michael. I met him at a fundraiser for the Memorial Fund 6 months after David died. He was a pediatric cardiologist at Children's Hospital, thoughtful and kind, with a gentle sense of humor that reminded me of David in some ways. We started as friends, sharing coffee after foundation meetings, then gradually transitioning to occasional dinners. It was different than what I had with David, as it should be. Michael understood that David would always be part of my life, that loving again didn't mean replacing what came before. We were taking things slowly, both of us cautious but hopeful. Standing in the garden that spring morning, I reflected on everything David had taught me, not just during our years together, but even after he was gone. His foresight in preparing those documents had protected me when I was at my most vulnerable. His detailed records had validated my experiences with Rebecca when my own parents tried to dismiss them. His love continued to shield me even in his absence. I had learned difficult lessons through this ordeal that family relationships need clear boundaries to remain healthy. That documentation is not just a legal precaution, but sometimes an emotional necessity that forgiveness doesn't have to mean forgetting or allowing harmful patterns to continue. That sometimes the people we expect to protect us are the ones we need protection from. But I had also learned about my own strength. I had faced Rebecca's betrayal, navigated the legal complexities, and made difficult decisions about how to move forward, all while processing the devastating loss of my husband. I had found a way to honor David's memory while beginning to build a new life for myself. The tulips swayed in the spring breeze, resilient after the long winter. I thought about how grief is like that too, not a straight line, but a series of seasons, each bringing its own challenges and unexpected beauties. I wasn't the same person I had been before David died, before Rebecca's betrayal. I was stronger in some ways, more cautious in others, but ultimately more authentic in how I approached relationships and boundaries. Sometimes the most painful betrayals force us to find strength we never knew we had, I said softly to the garden David had loved. You couldn't have known what would happen after you were gone, but somehow you prepared me to face it. And in that way, your love protects me still. As I turned to go back inside, I felt a sense of peace that had been absent for so long. Not because the grief was gone, it never would be completely, but because I had found a way to carry it alongside hope for the future. David had given me that gift, teaching me that love endures even when the person is gone, that preparation and honesty are acts of profound caring. If there's one thing I would share with anyone facing betrayal within their family, it's this: protect yourself with both documentation and boundaries. The people who truly love you will respect those boundaries, and the ones who don't were never safe for you to begin with.